weighing in. So what we might do now is get some reaction from Alex Ryvchin, the co-CEO of the Executive Council of the Australian Jury, and then we'll move on to other things because I'm sure Michael will have a bit to say about it, as will Clinton Maynard later on this afternoon. Alex Ryvchin, co-chief executive of the Australian Jury. He's on the line with us now. Alex, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mark.
What was your reaction to what you saw on the streets of Sydney, mainly the Harbour Bridge yesterday?
Look, it was disappointing. It was disappointing to see tens of thousands of people manipulated in such a way. And when you have a group of that size, they're not all extremists, they're not all fanatics. I'm sure a lot of people came along because they're despairing of what's happening in Gaza and they want to see an end to the war. But they've unwittingly lent themselves to a campaign that is violent inherently, that's against peace, that wants to promote war as long as it's Israelis that are losing. This was a rally yesterday staged by the Palestine Action Group, the same group that as October 7 was unfolding, applied for a permit to march in Sydney in celebration of those atrocities. They hailed it as a humiliation of Israel and a lawful reclaiming of lands by the Palestinian people. This is where 1,200 people were massacred, women were brutally gang raped and tortured, 250 people were dragged off into captivity, and 50 remain there. And the fact that eminent Australians, a handful of them, walked under the banner of the Palestine Action Group and lent themselves to this campaign, I think it's shocking.
It's shocking. And the other thing that I found shocking, Alex, is the signs that were being held and the chants: death, death to the IDF, Zionists and neo-Nazis, abolish Israel, abolish Australia. In the protest in Melbourne, we had an Australian flag burned. I mean, that's not what Australia's all about.
No, but sadly, it's becoming more and more normalised, and it's becoming a part of the Australian character, which is deeply upsetting. Unless we stop it, unless we, the good and decent people of this country, say that this can't be allowed to happen. And the reason why they wanted to march on the Harbour Bridge to capture another icon was to send a message that this is their bridge and this is their country, that their movement is taking over our country. Now, Julian Leeser, the Shadow Attorney General, I think said it very well. The Harbour Bridge belongs to all of us, and it should only be used for marches that bring our country together, like Indigenous reconciliation and Australian issues that unify the country. This broke the country apart. This could have been a peace march, and Jews and others would have marched with them. But this was about advancing an anti-Israel agenda, about villainizing Israelis and Jewish Australians. They had no regard for the Israeli hostages. We've seen horrific images overnight of a 24-year-old man who looks broken, like human wreckage. He's the hungriest, most starved man in Gaza, but these people have utterly no regard for him.
Do Jewish Australians have any plans on protesting, Alex? I mean, there's a precedent that's been set now. I mean, do you have any plans to protest on the Sydney Harbour Bridge like we saw yesterday?
Look, we don't want to bring the foreign conflict to Australian shores. We've held vigils before in parks and prayer ceremonies and things to bring awareness to the plight of the hostages, but we don't want to take over the Harbour Bridge. We don't want to have officers of the law who are there to protect and serve standing for hours getting drenched. We don't want to have a toll of $2 million for the taxpayers of this state, but we do want to know that the majority of Australians stand with us, and we receive calls and messages every day to that effect, and that bolsters us. That gives us strength to keep going.
The judge who made this decision on Saturday has, like I said, set a dangerous precedent because it's now a free-for-all. All somebody needs to do is to apply to the Supreme Court. If the police reject or the police go to the Supreme Court, they can use this case as a precedent. I started the show this morning, Alex, by suggesting that the Premier and the opposition, there needs to be bipartisan support with this, need to draft legislation to prevent the bridge and Opera House being used for protest. Is that something you would support?
Look, I think that something needs to be done to prevent this from happening again. And what I really dislike is when you have small activist groups like Palestine Action Group, who are deeply anti-democratic, anti-Western, anti-Israel, support the most extreme, vicious regimes around the world, when they exploit our democracy and our freedoms to advance their agenda. They're laughing at us right now. They're hailing this as a huge celebration and a huge victory in their cause. And unfortunately, I think lots of Australians have unwittingly supported them in doing so. And I think the judge, I think there was a very bad decision and a misstep on their part. The fact that they took them at face value when they said this was about humanity, when in fact it's about a very selective application of that notion.
What's the Jewish community saying at the moment, Alex? Because I must admit, when I was watching this all unfold yesterday, that the first people that I thought of were Jewish Australians. Now, if there was a Jewish Australian who wanted to spend yesterday in the city, they would have been prevented from doing that because they knew what was about to play out on the streets and across the main deck of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. How are they feeling, given they've had to live their lives in fear in Sydney through these anti-Semitic attacks, these anti-Semitic chants that have been levelled at them just in their everyday walk of life? How are they feeling? What are they saying to you?
Look, there's a lot of despair in the community, and the minute that the decision was handed down by the judge, I think it was a collective blow to the Jewish community. It felt like a gut punch. But at the same time, you know, we move on. We're a strong and resilient community, and we look at what the people of Israel have endured for 22 months now. We think of what the hostages have gone through for approaching 2 years of starvation and brutality and torture, kept in tunnels underground. These are civilians. You know, I mentioned Evitar David, a 24-year-old musician who was dragged from a music festival and is now being made to dig his own grave by Hamas in a tunnel underground. I mean, this is savage. So when we look at what these people are enduring, our life is a picnic in comparison, and we draw strength from that.
I've said this morning, Alex, that I don't have a problem with anybody protesting, right? I will respect anybody's right in a democracy like Australia to go out there and voice their opinion on a whole range of things. Where I have a problem, though, is paralysing and crippling the city by taking over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Let me just get this on record. Are you the same? Do you have a problem with people protesting? And should they be allowed to use the Harbour Bridge in future?
We have, from the very outset, defended the right to protest. It's a fundamental right in this country. It's one of the things that separates us from tyrannies and despotic regimes like Hamas. But no right is absolute and unlimited. There is no right to cost taxpayers in the state $2 million. There's no right to force police officers in a dangerous situation on short notice. There's no right to paralyse the city in this way. So there needs to be a logical, prudent application of the law so that it serves all Australians and not the clamorous few.
The other question I wanted to put to you this morning, Alex, and, you know, I opened the lines in the first hour to hear from a whole range of people, and there were a couple of people that called through. It's their democratic right on an open line to have their say, and they said the reason why we took to the streets of Sydney and to the bridge is to voice our opposition to the genocide in Gaza. What is your response to these people that continually talk about the genocide that is allegedly being committed by Israel in Gaza?
Look, it's one of the most malicious pieces of slander that I've ever heard, this notion of genocide. I mean, this is a war that Israel did not want, did not choose, that was forced upon it by the singular brutality of October 7. That was an act of genocide. When you had 6,000 Gazans marauding through Israeli towns, killing every man, woman and child they could find, that was genocidal. But a war in response, a tough war, a gritty war, a horrible war of urban warfare where people are suffering without question, that is war, that is self-defense. Doesn't come anywhere near genocide.
And one last one, Alex. What do you want to say to the people of Sydney? Because you and I have spoken in the past about the wonderful country we live in. There is a hell of a lot of division out there at the moment. What would you like to say to the people of Sydney that watched on yesterday, may have turned the news on last night and thought, what is our Sydney city becoming? What did you want to say to him?
Look, I want to say thank you to the people of the city and to the people of this country. And, you know, we go through tough days like yesterday when it seems like everyone's against us, but I know that's not the case. I know from speaking to people in the street and the amount of calls and messages I get, that the majority of people abhor this. They have no tolerance for anti-Semitism. They have no tolerance for extremism and Hamas terrorism. They stand with the Jewish community, and we stand with them in return. Thank you.
All right, Alex. Thanks so much for joining us, mate, and I'm sure we'll hear more from you. It's important to hear from all sides. I mean, we heard from the pro-Palestinian protesters yesterday, so I thought it's only fair and reasonable that we hear from a Jewish leader in Alex Ryvchin this morning, the co-chief executive officer of the Executive Council of Australian